Hey everyone, tonight, let's slow things down a little. Dim the lights if you can. Let the room become quiet. Maybe settle beneath a blanket. Let your head sink into the pillow and allow the day to become somebody else's problem for a while. Tonight, we're going to wander into a small Victorian village, sometime in the middle of the 19th century, where the streets are narrow, the evenings are misty, and nearly every respectable household owns at least one clock that is slightly more dramatic than it needs to be. At the edge of the village stands a little stone cottage. It is not grand. It has no sweeping staircase, no marble entrance hall, and certainly no enormous portrait of a duke staring suspiciously at everyone who walks past. It is simply a cottage, a low roof, 2 chimneys, a small garden, a wooden door painted dark green, and beside that door, a brass plaque that reads, Elias Bell, Clockmaker. The brass has become dull with age. The letters are still visible, though, and if you were walking past on a cool autumn evening, you might notice something else. A faint ticking. It comes through the windows. Not one clock, not 2, dozens, perhaps hundreds. Clocks ticking on shelves, clocks ticking on walls, clocks ticking inside cabinets, tiny clocks ticking beneath cloth covers, large clocks ticking slowly in the corners. They do not all agree. Some are a little fast, some are a little slow. One has apparently decided that 4 minutes past the hour is a perfectly reasonable place to stop. Elias Bell has spent most of his life trying to convince them otherwise, and tonight, as the village settles down around him, he is still awake. Of course he is. Clockmakers are rarely permitted the luxury of ignoring time. Elias is 63 years old. His hair is silver around the temples, though there are still stubborn patches of brown near the back of his head. He has a narrow face, tired blue eyes, and the permanently thoughtful expression of a man who has spent 40 years wondering why someone would manufacture a clock with 17 separate screws when 12 would clearly have been enough. He sits at his workbench beneath a small oil lamp. The cottage is quiet, or at least as quiet as a cottage full of clocks can possibly be. Tick, tick, tick. A pendulum swings gently. Tick, tick, tick. Somewhere near the fireplace, another clock answers. Tick, tick. Then another. It is almost like rain. Except rain does not usually stop because a spring has become annoyed. Elias leans forward. In front of him sits a small brass pocket watch. It belonged to a gentleman named Mr. Whitcomb, who lives on the other side of the village and has already visited twice this week to ask whether his watch is ready. It is not ready. It has never been ready. Elias knows this. Mr. Whitcomb does not. This is one of the small tragedies of professional life. Elias lifts the watch carefully. He holds it close to the lamp. The little gears catch the light. Everything inside is tiny, almost absurdly tiny. A person might look at a clock from the outside and imagine that time simply enters it somehow. But inside, there are wheels, teeth, springs, pins, levers, balance mechanisms, tiny pieces of metal, all cooperating with remarkable discipline, which is more than can be said for most human families. Elias reaches for a small screwdriver. He adjusts one screw, then another. He waits. The balance wheel begins to move, back and forth, back and forth. The watch is alive again. Elias smiles, just slightly. He has always liked this moment, the moment when something silent begins to move. There is comfort in it. A clock does not ask where you have been. It does not ask what you regret. It does not care whether your day went badly. It simply moves. 1 second, then another, and in a world where nearly everything seems to change, that steady movement can feel almost reassuring. Outside, the village is sleeping. The village is called Ashcombe. It is not a particularly important place. No major battle happened here. No king was born here. No famous philosopher ever stood in the square and declared something profound. There is no reason for history books to remember Ashcombe, and that is precisely why it feels peaceful. It is the sort of place where ordinary lives quietly unfold. A baker opens his shop before sunrise. A schoolmistress walks along the same lane every morning. A widow keeps 3 cats despite insisting that she dislikes animals. A farmer complains about the weather. Everyone complains about the weather. This is one of the great constants of human history. The weather is never quite right. If it rains, people complain. If it does not rain, people complain. If it is cold, they complain. If it becomes warm, they complain that it is unusually warm. And somehow, everyone remains surprised by this. Ashcombe sits in a shallow valley, surrounded by rolling fields. There is a church near the center of the village. Its stone tower rises above the rooftops. The church clock is large and slightly crooked. Elias repaired it many years ago. He remembers climbing the tower stairs with a toolbox under one arm, while the church warden followed behind, repeatedly explaining that the clock had never behaved strangely before. Elias had discovered that it had behaved strangely for at least 12 years. Nobody had noticed. Or perhaps nobody had wanted to. That happens with clocks. They can become part of the background, a sound you hear so often that you stop hearing it. The clock in the church tower has been counting the hours for generations. People have married beneath it. Children have been born beneath it. People have grown old beneath it. And now, late at night, its hands move across the dark face while the village sleeps. At 11 o'clock, the bell rings. 1, 2, 3. The sound travels across the valley. 4, 5, 6. Elias pauses at his workbench. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then silence returns. He looks toward the window. The glass is slightly fogged. Beyond it, the garden has disappeared into darkness. A few bare branches move in the wind. Autumn has arrived. The leaves have turned brown and gold. Some still cling stubbornly to the trees. Others have already gathered along the garden wall. Elias has never liked clearing leaves. He considers them part of the natural order. His late wife, Margaret, used to disagree. She believed that if a leaf landed in the wrong place, it should be removed immediately. This was one of the many small disagreements of their marriage. Not important, not dramatic, just the sort of disagreement that becomes part of a shared life. Margaret had been gone for almost 6 years now. Elias still sometimes turned toward the kitchen, expecting to hear her moving pans around. Then he would remember. The cottage would be quiet, and the clocks would continue ticking. He never changed the clocks, not even the ones that had belonged to her. There was a small mantel clock in the kitchen that Margaret had received from her parents when she was 19. It had a painted blue face. The paint was chipped around the edges. The clock gained 3 minutes every week. Elias could have repaired it. He had repaired it many times, but eventually he stopped. He simply adjusted the hands whenever he remembered. Perhaps that was easier. Some things did not need to be perfect. Some things were allowed to be slightly wrong. The thought makes him smile. He places Mr. Whitcomb's pocket watch inside a small velvet-lined box. Tomorrow, he tells himself, tomorrow it will be ready. It probably will. Then again, Mr. Whitcomb has been told this before. Elias blows gently across the workbench. A tiny piece of dust moves away. He closes his eyes for a moment. The room is warm. The fire has burned down to glowing embers. The oil lamp flickers. The clocks continue. Tick, tick, tick. For a moment, Elias simply listens. There are different kinds of silence. There is the silence of an empty house, the silence of a field at night, the silence after snowfall. And then there is this, a house filled with tiny mechanical movements, 1,000 little sounds reminding him that the world has not completely stopped. He reaches for the lamp, but before putting it out, he notices something on the far end of the workbench, a small wooden clock. He has not seen it in years. It is covered in dust. Elias reaches over and lifts it carefully. The clock is old, older than most of the clocks in his shop. Its wooden case is dark with age. The brass hands are tarnished. There is a little carved bird above the dial. Elias remembers it. His father made this clock long ago, before Elias became a clockmaker himself, before the cottage belonged to him, before Ashcombe became the quiet village he knew. His father had been a clockmaker too, and his grandfather before him, 3 generations of men who had spent their lives listening to ticking. Elias turns the clock over. There is a small inscription on the back. He wipes away the dust with his thumb. The words appear slowly. For Elias, when you are old enough to understand that time is not the enemy, he reads it twice. Then he laughs quietly. His father had always been fond of making simple things sound mysterious. Elias had been 12 when the clock was given to him. At 12, he had thought time was an enemy. School seemed endless. Winter seemed endless. Sunday afternoons seemed particularly endless. But now, at 63, he understands what his father meant. Time was not an enemy. It simply did not negotiate. It moved whether you were ready or not. It moved through childhood, through marriage, through work, through grief, through quiet evenings, and eventually, it brought you here, to a little cottage, to a room full of clocks, to one final hour before sleep. Elias winds the old wooden clock. The key turns with a soft metallic click. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he sets it on the shelf. The pendulum begins to swing. Tick, tick, tick. He turns down the lamp. The room becomes darker. The fire gives one last soft glow across the walls. Outside, the wind moves through the trees. And somewhere far away, the church clock begins preparing for midnight. Elias walks slowly toward the stairs. He stops halfway. For just a moment, he listens. The clocks continue ticking behind him. They will continue after he is asleep. They will continue tomorrow. And the day after that, quietly measuring something nobody in the cottage can hold. He smiles. Then he climbs the stairs, and downstairs, beneath the dim moonlight, the little clockmaker's cottage settles into the night. Tick, tick, tick. And for now, that is enough. Morning arrives quietly in Ashcombe. There is no grand announcement, no trumpet, No dramatic sunrise appearing behind the hills as though the heavens have suddenly remembered that they are responsible for providing scenery. Instead, the first sign of morning is simply the light. A pale gray glow begins to gather behind the curtains of the clockmaker's cottage. The darkness becomes softer. The outlines of furniture return. The shelves become visible. The clocks emerge from the shadows one by one, and, naturally, they are all ticking. Elias Bell wakes before the alarm. He usually does. At his age, the body becomes rather efficient at deciding when sleep has lasted long enough. He opens his eyes. For several seconds, he remains still. He looks at the ceiling, then toward the window. The curtains are closed, but a thin line of daylight has appeared along the bottom. He hears the clocks downstairs, faintly, even from the bedroom. Tick, tick, tick. Elias smiles. There are worse sounds to wake up to. He sits on the edge of the bed and puts on his slippers. The floorboards are cold. Victorian houses are excellent at preserving history, particularly the unpleasant parts of it. Cold floors, drafty windows, doors that refuse to close properly, and fireplaces that seem determined to consume an entire tree every winter. Elias walks downstairs. The cottage smells faintly of ash, wood, and yesterday's tea. He opens the curtains in the kitchen. Morning light spills across the table. Outside, the garden is covered with dew. A blackbird hops along the stone wall. It looks at Elias. Elias looks at it. Neither seems particularly impressed. "Good morning," Elias says. The bird flies away. Elias notes. Quite. He fills the kettle. There is something wonderfully predictable about making tea in the morning. The kettle, the cup, the spoon, the small tin of leaves. The same motions repeated year after year. Some people find repetition boring. Elias finds it comforting. A clockmaker spends his life around repetition. A gear turns. A spring releases. A pendulum swings. A hand moves. Then the process begins again. There is no embarrassment in doing the same thing twice, or 1,000 times. The important thing is that it works. He pours the tea. Then he carries the cup into the workshop. The workshop occupies the largest room downstairs. It has a low ceiling and wooden beams darkened by decades of smoke. Shelves cover nearly every wall. On them sit clocks of every imaginable shape. Tall clocks, short clocks, round clocks, square clocks, wooden clocks, brass clocks, travel clocks, pocket watches, marine chronometers, alarm clocks, and one enormous clock that has been waiting for repair since 1871. Elias has no intention of admitting this to its owner. Fortunately, its owner died in 1884, so the matter has become somewhat less urgent. He sits at the workbench. The first thing he does each morning is wind the clocks. Not all of them. That would be excessive, but enough. He begins with the large regulator clock near the window. The winding key fits into the brass socket. He turns it slowly. The mechanism responds with a quiet metallic hum. Then he checks the pendulum. Still moving. Good. Next comes a small French mantel clock. Its porcelain case is painted with tiny flowers. Elias never liked it. It is too decorative, too delicate, too pleased with itself, but it keeps excellent time. And that, in the end, is what matters. He winds it, then another. Then another. The workshop slowly comes alive. By 7 o'clock, the cottage is full of ticking. The clocks do not tick together. That would be almost unsettling. Instead, they form layers. Fast ticking, slow ticking, occasional clicks, a distant chime, the gentle movement of pendulums. It is almost musical. Elias has heard this sound for most of his life. He cannot imagine the cottage without it. Outside, Ashcombe is waking too. A cart rolls along the lane. The baker's door opens. A dog barks somewhere near the church. The village postman appears at the end of the street. His name is Thomas Reed. He is 47. He has delivered letters in Ashcombe for 21 years. Thomas believes that people should be grateful for the post. He also believes they should stop writing letters that require him to walk to the other end of the valley in heavy rain. These two opinions have remained perfectly compatible in his mind. He reaches the clockmaker's cottage just after 8. He knocks twice. Elias hears him. "Come in." The door opens. Thomas steps inside. "Morning, Elias." "Morning." Thomas removes his hat. He holds out 3 letters. "2 for you." Elias looks at them. "Only 2? One is for the previous occupant." Elias raises an eyebrow. "The previous occupant has been dead for 6 years." "I know. Then why bring it?" Thomas looks at the envelope. "I thought perhaps you might enjoy the mystery." Elias sighs. He takes the letters. One is from a supplier in London. The other is a bill. The third is addressed to Margaret. Elias looks at it quietly. Thomas notices. He says nothing. There are moments when silence is kinder than conversation. Elias places the letter on the table. "Thank you." Thomas nods. He puts his hat back on. Church clock is running slow. Elias looks up. "How slow?" 5 minutes. "That's not slow. It is when you're waiting for church." "You're never waiting for church." Thomas smiles. "No, but Mrs. Pritchard is." Elias knows exactly who he means. Mrs. Pritchard lives near the square. She is 72 and has never forgiven the church clock for gaining 30 seconds during Easter of 1891. She still mentions it. Nobody knows why. Elias finishes his tea. "I'll look at it after breakfast." Thomas notes. Then he leaves. The door closes. The workshop returns to its quiet rhythm. Elias looks at Margaret's letter. The envelope is cream-colored. There is a London postmark. He turns it over. The handwriting is unfamiliar. He does not open it. Not yet. Instead, he puts it beside the old wooden clock his father made. Then he returns to work. This is how mornings often pass in Ashcombe. Not through important events, through small ones. A door opens. A kettle boils. A letter arrives. A clock loses a minute. Someone forgets to buy bread. Someone remembers. Someone complains. Someone laughs. And somewhere, without anyone noticing, another hour disappears. By 9:30, the first customer arrives. Her name is Miss Clara Finch. She is 26. She teaches music to children in the village. She owns a small silver watch. It belonged to her mother. She places it carefully on the counter. It stopped. Elias looks at the watch. "When?" "Last night." "Did you drop it?" "No." "Did you wind it?" "Yes." "Did you wind it fully?" Clara hesitates. "I thought so." Elias gives her a gentle smile. He opens the back. The spring is not broken. The mechanism is not damaged. The problem is much simpler. The watch is full of dust. He looks at Clara. Do you keep it in your pocket? Yes. With anything else? A handkerchief? Anything metal? She thinks. A hairpin. Elias notes. Your watch has been sharing a pocket with a hairpin. Yes. That explains the dust. Clara looks slightly embarrassed. Elias does not tease her. He has made considerably worse mistakes. Once, when he was 19, he spent 3 hours repairing a clock that was not broken. The clock had simply been unplugged. Electric clocks were still new at the time. He had been so ashamed that he had never told his father. His father found out anyway. Fathers usually did. Elias cleans the watch. He oils the mechanism. He adjusts the balance. Then he winds it. The second hand begins to move. Clara watches. Will it be all right? It should be. How much? Elias names the price. Clara reaches for her purse. Before she leaves, she pauses. Do you ever get tired of clocks? Elias looks around the workshop. There are clocks everywhere. Some are beautiful. Some are ugly. Some are broken. Some are waiting. Some are older than he is. He thinks for a moment. Sometimes. Clara smiles. I thought you might say that. But, Elias continues, I get more tired of people. She laughs softly. Fair enough. Then she leaves. The door closes. Elias returns to his bench. For a moment, he watches the watch Clara brought. It continues ticking. Steady now. Reliable. He thinks about her question. Does he ever get tired of clocks? Perhaps. But clocks are easier than people. A clock does not pretend. If it is broken, it is broken. If it is fast, it is fast. If it is slow, it is slow. You can open it. You can see what went wrong. People are less cooperative. They carry their problems inside themselves. And unlike clocks, they rarely come with useful little screws. Elias smiles at his own thought. Outside, the morning brightens. The mist begins to lift from the fields. The church clock stands above the village. Its hands are indeed 5 minutes slow. Elias can see them through the workshop window. He finishes his tea. Then he prepares his tools. The church clock is waiting. And so, apparently, is another ordinary morning. He puts on his coat, locks the workshop door, and walks toward the church. Behind him, the cottage continues ticking, quietly, patiently, as though it has all the time in the world, which, for a clockmaker's cottage, it almost does. The walk from Elias Bell's cottage to the church takes only 7 minutes. 8, if he stops to speak with someone. 9, if that someone is Mrs. Pritchard. And unfortunately for Elias, Mrs. Pritchard is already standing near the churchyard gate. She is wearing a dark wool coat, a small black hat, and the expression of a woman who has discovered an administrative failure of considerable importance. Elias, good morning. The clock is wrong, so I hear. 5 minutes. I understand. It was correct yesterday. Elias looks up at the tower. The large clock face is pale against the morning sky. The hands show 10 minutes past 10. The village clock should show 15. 5 minutes. A tiny amount of time. Almost nothing. And yet 5 minutes can apparently cause great suffering. I'll take a look, Elias says. Mrs. Pritchard nods. I knew you would. Then she walks away. Elias watches her go. He has known Mrs. Pritchard for 30 years. He suspects she would survive the collapse of civilization quite comfortably, provided someone continued maintaining the church clock. The church itself is an old stone building. Parts of it date back several centuries. The newer sections are Victorian, naturally. The Victorians had a remarkable enthusiasm for adding things to old buildings. A tower, a window, a plaque, a committee room, another plaque explaining the first plaque. The clock mechanism sits high inside the tower. To reach it, Elias must climb a narrow wooden staircase. He has done this hundreds of times. He still dislikes it. The stairs creak beneath his boots. The walls are cold. Small windows let in narrow strips of daylight. Halfway up, he passes the bell ropes. They hang from the ceiling. Heavy. Still. Elias remembers when he was young and thought the ropes looked enormous. His father had brought him here once. He had been 12. He remembered looking upward and wondering how the bells could possibly be moved by something as simple as rope. His father had told him that most complicated things depended on something simple. Elias had not understood. He understands now. At the top of the stairs, he opens a wooden door. The clock mechanism is inside. It occupies almost the entire room. Large iron frames support brass gears. Weights hang from thick ropes. The pendulum moves slowly through the center. Back and forth. Back and forth. Elias sets down his toolbox. He looks at the mechanism. Nothing appears broken. That is good. Broken things are easier. If a gear is broken, you replace it. If a spring is damaged, you repair it. But when a clock simply decides to become inaccurate, the problem can be much more subtle. Elias checks the pendulum, then the escapement, then the gears. Everything seems fine. He listens. Tick, pause, tick, pause. He counts. He watches the movement. There, a slight hesitation, barely noticeable. The clock loses a fraction of a second every few minutes. Not enough to matter immediately, but after a day, it becomes noticeable. After a week, someone like Mrs. Pritchard becomes involved. Elias adjusts the regulator. A tiny change. Then another. He waits. The pendulum continues. The mechanism settles. He checks his pocket watch. Then the church clock. The difference begins to disappear. Elias notes. Much better. He closes the cabinet. Before leaving, he looks around the tower room. There is something peaceful about being up here. Below him, the village is small. The rooftops look almost toy-like. Smoke rises from chimneys. People move along the lanes. Carts pass through the square. The fields stretch toward the horizon. From this height, everything appears orderly. That is one of the strange tricks of distance. Problems become smaller. Arguments become invisible. Bills disappear. Illness disappears. Regrets disappear. Even people become tiny figures moving slowly through the world. Elias thinks perhaps this is why people enjoy looking down from towers. For a few minutes, everything seems manageable. He closes the window. Then begins the descent. When he reaches the churchyard, Mrs. Pritchard is waiting. Well, it should be correct now. She looks toward the clock, then at her own watch. She compares them. Once, twice. Her expression softens. Yes, Elias smiles. Excellent. She nods. You always were a reliable man. Elias considers telling her that his left knee hurts whenever it rains. Instead, he says thank you. Mrs. Pritchard walks away. Elias remains in the churchyard. The morning has become brighter. A few leaves drift across the path. Near the church wall is a small stone bench. Elias sits. He does this sometimes. Not for long. Just a few minutes. He likes the churchyard. It is quiet. There are old graves beneath the trees, names carved into stone. Some dates are so old that Elias has to bend closer to read them. People who lived before him, people who worried about things that no longer matter, people who once believed their own problems were enormous. Perhaps they were. Perhaps every generation believes that. Elias looks at the stones. He remembers Margaret again. Her grave is not here. She is buried beside her parents in a village several miles away. Elias visits twice a year. He does not visit every week. He never felt the need. Margaret had disliked unnecessary travel. She used to say that if something was more than 5 miles away, it could probably wait. Elias had once told her that London was considerably farther than 5 miles. She replied that London was therefore definitely unnecessary. He had never managed to argue with that. He smiles at the memory. Then he hears footsteps. It is Thomas Reed, the postman. Thomas is carrying his leather bag. Clock fixed? Yes. Mrs. Pritchard happy? Apparently. Miracles happen. Elias smiles. Thomas sits beside him. For a while, neither speaks. The church clock ticks above them, a soft mechanical rhythm. Thomas looks toward the tower. My grandfather used to say that clock was always right. Your grandfather was mistaken. Thomas laughs. Probably. They sit quietly. Thomas eventually says, "You received a letter from Margaret." Elias looks at him. Yes. Do you know who it's from? No. Thomas hesitates. I've seen that handwriting before. Elias turns toward him. Where? Thomas shrugs. Years ago. How many? 20. Maybe 25. Elias says nothing. Thomas continues. I can't remember the name. Was it a man? I think so. Elias looks down at his hands. That's not particularly helpful. I know. Thomas stands. I'll remember eventually. Take your time. Thomas smiles. That's what you always say. Then he walks away. Elias remains on the bench. The letter. He had almost forgotten it. Now he remembers. The envelope is still waiting at home. He wonders who sent it. Perhaps it is nothing. Probably a bill, an old account, a forgotten acquaintance, something about Margaret's family. There are always explanations. Most mysteries are less mysterious once the paperwork arrives. Elias stands. He begins walking home. The village is busier now. Children walk toward the schoolhouse. A woman carries a basket of vegetables. A man unloads sacks outside the bakery. The blacksmith's hammer rings from the far end of the street. Ashcombe is not silent anymore, but it remains gentle. There is no hurry. Not yet. Elias passes the baker's shop. The baker, Mr. Cole, waves. Morning, Elias. Morning. Clock behaving. Better than most people. Mr. Cole laughs. That's not saying much. Elias continues. He passes the school. Through the windows he can hear children reading. A teacher's voice rises and falls. Then the sound disappears as he walks farther away. At last, he reaches his cottage. The brass plaque beside the door catches the sunlight. Elias Bell, Clockmaker. He unlocks the door. Inside, the clocks greet him. Or rather, They continue doing what they were already doing. Tick, tick, tick. He removes his coat, sets down his toolbox, then remembers the letter. It is still on the kitchen table. Elias stands beside it. He looks at the envelope. The handwriting is careful, old-fashioned. The name is written clearly. Mrs. Margaret Bell. Elias touches the paper. For a moment, he considers putting it away. Instead, he opens it. Inside is a single sheet. The letter is short. There is no dramatic confession, no mysterious warning, no secret inheritance. Just a few paragraphs. The writer explains that he had recently found an old collection of papers. Among them was a note written by Margaret many years ago. The writer had thought Elias should have it. At the bottom is a name, Samuel Bell. Elias sits down. His father's name. He reads the letter again. Samuel Bell had died 37 years earlier. Elias had been 26. His father had left behind tools, books, clocks, and very few explanations. Elias remembers the funeral, the cold morning, the dark coat, the smell of wet earth, his mother crying quietly, Margaret standing beside him. Elias remembers thinking that his father had always seemed impossible to understand, even after death, perhaps especially after death. He looks at the letter, then at the old wooden clock, the one his father made. The clock is still ticking. Elias reaches for the note mentioned in the letter. It is enclosed separately, a small folded piece of paper. He opens it. The handwriting is unmistakably his father's. Elias recognizes it immediately. The message is only a few lines. He reads them slowly. His father's words are simple. They are not instructions. They are not an apology. They are simply a reminder. A clock can tell you what hour it is. It cannot tell you what to do with that hour. Elias sits quietly. Outside, a cart passes. Somewhere in the village, a dog barks. The church clock strikes 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The sound fades. Elias looks at his father's clock. Tick, tick, tick. For the first time in many years, he wonders whether his father had understood something he himself had only begun to understand. Time was not something to defeat. It was something to inhabit, one ordinary hour at a time. Elias folds the note. He places it beside the clock. Then he makes another cup of tea, because some discoveries, even the quiet ones, are best considered with tea. And in the little clockmaker's cottage, the afternoon begins. Slowly, without hurry, as another collection of minutes passes through the room, the afternoon settles over Ashcombe with the quiet confidence of a day that has nowhere particular to go. There is no great excitement. The village does not suddenly become famous. No important gentleman arrives by carriage. No telegram announces the collapse of an empire. Instead, the bakery continues baking bread. The blacksmith continues hammering horseshoes, and Mrs. Pritchard continues checking the church clock every 20 minutes, as though expecting it to develop a personal grudge. Inside the clockmaker's cottage, Elias Bell sits at his workbench. The note from his father is still beside him. He has read it several times, not because it is difficult to understand. Quite the opposite. It is painfully simple. A clock can tell you what hour it is. It cannot tell you what to do with that hour. Elias turns the paper over. Nothing is written on the back. He had expected perhaps another sentence, something dramatic, something that would explain everything. People are very fond of explanations, especially explanations that arrive decades late. But there is nothing else, just the words and the handwriting, his father's handwriting. Elias folds the note again. He places it carefully inside the drawer beneath his workbench. Then he locks the drawer. He does not know why. Perhaps some things feel safer when they are locked away. The workshop clock on the wall shows 2 minutes past 3. Elias checks his pocket watch. The clock is correct. He nods. Then he looks toward the staircase. Above the workshop is a small room that has not been used in years. It was once his father's room. Later, it became Elias's own room when he was a young man. Then, after he married Margaret, they moved into the larger bedroom at the back of the cottage. The little room upstairs gradually became storage. Boxes, old ledgers, broken furniture, unused tools, things that had once seemed worth keeping, things that had become impossible to throw away. The room has been closed for nearly 6 years. Elias suddenly decides to open it. He takes the stairs slowly. The wooden steps creak beneath him. At the top is a narrow corridor. There are 2 doors. The first leads to the bedroom. The second leads to the old room. Elias puts his hand on the handle. He pauses, then opens the door. Dust immediately becomes visible in the afternoon light. The room smells of old wood. There is a small desk beneath the window, a narrow bed, a wardrobe, several shelves, and boxes. Far too many boxes. Elias stands in the doorway. For a moment, he feels as though he has stepped backward in time. The room is almost exactly as he remembers it. His father's desk remains beneath the window. The chair is still there. One leg is slightly shorter than the others. His father had fixed it by placing a folded piece of cardboard underneath. Elias smiles. He had always intended to repair the chair properly. He never did. Perhaps his father simply preferred the cardboard. Some people become strangely attached to temporary solutions. A loose button, a cracked cup, a chair with one unreliable leg, a clock that gains 3 minutes every week. There is something comforting about objects that have survived imperfectly. Elias walks toward the desk. He brushes away the dust. The wood beneath is dark and polished. He opens the first drawer. Inside are old pencils, a ruler, several brass screws, a pocket knife, a small magnifying glass, and a folded handkerchief. Elias picks it up. He recognizes it. His father used to carry it every day. Elias remembers watching him wipe his hands with it after working on clocks. A very ordinary memory. And yet, now that his father has been gone for decades, ordinary memories are the ones that remain. Not the great conversations, not the important occasions, but small things. A handkerchief, a chair, a cup of tea, the sound of a door closing, the smell of machine oil, the way his father used to clear his throat before speaking. Memory is strange. It does not preserve everything equally. Sometimes it throws away the important things and keeps the useless details. Elias closes the drawer. On the desk sits a small wooden box. He has never seen it before. At least, he does not remember seeing it. The box is about the size of a book. It has a brass latch. Elias lifts the lid. Inside are old papers, receipts, letters, a photograph, and several tiny clock components wrapped in cloth. He lifts the photograph. It shows 3 men standing outside the cottage. The picture is faded. The first man is his grandfather. The second is his father. The third is Elias himself. Elias is perhaps 17. He looks painfully serious. His father is standing beside him. His grandfather is holding a large clock. Elias remembers the day. Not clearly, but enough. It was taken during a summer afternoon. He had complained about having his photograph taken. His father had told him to stop complaining. His grandfather had laughed. Elias looks at the younger version of himself. 17. Thin, dark-haired, impatient, certain that his life would eventually become something very different. He smiles. It did not, or perhaps it did. That is the strange thing about ordinary lives. You imagine them as roads leading somewhere. Then one day, you realize that the road itself was the destination. Elias puts the photograph down. Beneath it is another envelope. The paper is yellowed. There is no name on the front. He opens it. Inside is a small collection of notes written by his father, mostly technical. Measurements, gear ratios, spring tensions, sketches. But near the bottom is a page that is different. It contains no diagrams, only a few lines. Elias reads them. His father had written about a clock, not a particular clock in the workshop, a clock that had belonged to his own father, Elias's grandfather. It had been made sometime in the 1840s. A traveling clock, small enough to fit inside a wooden case. According to the note, the clock had been lost. Elias remembers hearing this story as a child. His father had said the clock disappeared during a journey to London. He never explained how. Now Elias reads the note again. Apparently, his father had discovered the clock years later. It had been sold to an antiques dealer. He had bought it back, but he never brought it home. Instead, he left it with a friend in London. Why? Elias does not know. At the bottom of the page is an address, a London address. Ode, possibly still valid, possibly not. Elias sits down. He looks out the window. From here, he can see the garden, the old apple tree, the stone wall, the narrow lane. Everything is familiar. Everything is exactly where it should be. And yet, suddenly, the world feels slightly larger. For decades, Elias had believed he knew almost everything about his family. Now, in one afternoon, he has discovered that he knew considerably less than he thought. He folds the paper. He does not immediately decide what to do. There is no need. He has spent his life around clocks. He knows that some things happen slowly. A spring winds slowly. A pendulum moves slowly. A gear turns slowly. A life changes slowly. Sometimes you do not notice the movement until you look back. Elias remains in the room for another hour. He opens old boxes. He finds things he had forgotten. An old school book, a wooden toy, a broken pocket watch, a brass key, a letter from Margaret. That one stops him. The letter is not addressed to him. It is something she had written to his father. Elias remembers it. Margaret had always written beautifully. Her handwriting was small and neat. She had written to Samuel Bell shortly after Elias proposed. Elias had never read it. He hesitates. Then he decides he should not. Some letters belong to the people who wrote them, even when those people are gone. He places it back. Then he finds something else. A small notebook. The cover is dark green. Inside are dates, hundreds of them, each followed by a brief note. Some are about clocks. Some are about customers. Some are about weather. And some are simply names. Elias turns the pages. Then he notices one entry. The date is familiar. It is the date Margaret died. The handwriting is his father's. Elias frowns. His father had been dead for more than 30 years by then. So how could this be? He looks again. The date is not written as a record of an event. It is written as a prediction. Beside the date are 4 words. Elias will need this. Elias stares at the page. He sits completely still. The cottage below continues ticking. The sound reaches him through the floorboards. Tick, tick, tick. He closes the notebook. He does not know what to think. It could be coincidence. It probably is. There are thousands of dates in old notebooks. Sometimes one of them will happen to mean something. The human mind is very good at finding patterns, especially when it wants to. Elias knows this. He has repaired clocks for more than 40 years. He knows that a machine can appear mysterious when you cannot see the mechanism. People are much the same. There is usually a reason, even if you do not know it yet. He places the notebook back into the box. Then he stands. The afternoon light has begun to fade. It is nearly 5. Elias closes the shutters. The little room becomes dim. He walks downstairs. The workshop is exactly as he left it. The clocks are ticking. The fire has gone low. He lights another lamp. Then he begins preparing supper. Bread, cheese, a little soup. Nothing complicated. Margaret used to make elaborate meals. Elias never learned why. He had always been perfectly happy with soup. Perhaps this is another difference between people. Some want life to be elaborate. Others prefer it warm and simple. Elias sits at the kitchen table. He eats slowly. Outside, evening arrives. The windows turn black. The first stars appear above the rooftops. The church clock strikes 6. This time, it is correct. Elias smiles. Good. He clears the table, then returns to the workshop. The old wooden clock his father made is still ticking. Elias lifts it from the shelf. He opens the back. The mechanism is simple, old-fashioned, beautiful. He examines the gears. Then he notices something. Behind the mechanism is a small compartment. He has never seen it before. Perhaps he simply never looked. He presses the edge. The panel opens. Inside is a folded piece of paper. Elias takes it out. His hands are suddenly very still. He unfolds the paper. There is only one sentence, written in his father's familiar hand. When the house becomes quiet, listen carefully. Elias looks around the workshop. The cottage is quiet, except for the clocks. Tick, tick, tick. He sits down, and for a long time, he does nothing. He simply listens. Perhaps his father had meant something ordinary. Perhaps he had meant the clocks. Perhaps he had meant memory. Perhaps he had meant nothing at all. But tonight, Elias decides not to search for an answer. He has spent enough years repairing things that do not need to be repaired. Some questions can remain open. Some clocks can run a little slow. Some stories can have missing pages. And some evenings can simply be evenings. He turns down the lamp. The workshop grows dim. The little wooden clock continues ticking on the shelf. And outside, Ashcombe settles beneath the darkening sky. One house after another becomes quiet. One window after another goes dark. The village begins its long transition from day into night. And in the clockmaker's cottage, time continues moving. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily, as it always has. And, as it always will, the next morning begins with rain. Not heavy rain, nothing dramatic, just the soft, persistent kind that settles over the village and seems to suggest that nobody should make unnecessary plans. Elias Bell watches it through the kitchen window while his kettle warms on the stove. The garden is blurred behind the glass. The stone wall is wet. The apple tree bends slightly in the wind. Drops gather along the window frame and slowly slide downward. Elias has never particularly minded rain. Rain makes people stay indoors. And when people stay indoors, they tend to remember that clocks need repairing. Unfortunately, this is not always good news for the clockmaker. He finishes his tea, then looks at the old note from his father. The London address is still on the table. He has spent the better part of the morning thinking about it. Not obsessively. He is too old for that. But enough. The address belongs to a man named Henry Mercer. According to the note, Mercer had been a friend of his father's. Elias remembers the name, barely. His father had mentioned him once or twice, always vaguely, always without explanation. Elias wonders whether Henry Mercer is still alive. Probably not. 37 years is a long time. Then again, Elias has learned never to underestimate elderly men. Some of them seem determined to outlive everyone who remembers why they were famous in the first place. He folds the note. The rain continues. By 9 o'clock, Elias has made his decision. He will go to London. Not immediately. He has work to finish. There are clocks waiting, customers waiting, bills waiting. Bills, unlike people, have no understanding of holidays. So Elias spends the morning repairing 3 watches and 1 mantel clock. At noon, he closes the workshop. He tells himself he will return in 2 days, perhaps 3. He leaves instructions with Thomas Reed. Thomas arrives just as Elias is locking the door. Going somewhere? London. Thomas looks surprised. For how long? 2 days. Thomas glances at the cottage. Are you sure? Yes. Who's going to look after the clocks? They'll survive. Thomas looks doubtful. The clocks, perhaps. I'm thinking about Mrs. Pritchard. Elias laughs. I'll leave instructions. Good. Thomas takes the key. Elias puts on his coat. He carries a small leather case. Inside are a few clothes, a shaving kit, his father's note, and his pocket watch. Nothing else. He has never liked traveling with too much luggage. The train station is 2 miles away. Elias walks. The rain has become lighter. Mist hangs above the fields. The road is muddy. His boots become dirty almost immediately. He does not care. There are moments in life when clean boots become a surprisingly low priority. The station is small. On a platform. A brick building. A wooden bench. A station master who appears permanently disappointed with the railway timetable. Elias waits beneath the awning. A train arrive. Steam drifts across the platform. The locomotive hiss. People move about. Porters carry bags. A child cries. Someone drops an umbrella. Someone else immediately steps on it. The usual small chaos of travel. Elias boards. He finds a seat beside the window. The carriage smells of wool, coal smoke, and damp clothing. He settles back. The train begins moving, slowly at first, then faster. Ashcombe begins to disappear. The church tower becomes smaller. The houses become distant. The fields stretch out. Elias watches them. He has traveled to London many times over the years, but never for this reason. Never because of his father. The train passes through villages, then towns, then increasingly crowded places. The countryside gradually changes. More houses, more factories, more smoke, more people. The 19th century is moving. Sometimes Elias thinks it moves too quickly. Everything seems to be changing. Railways, telegraphs, electric lights, new machines, new businesses, new ideas. And yet, inside his leather case is a pocket watch almost 50 years old. Elias finds something comforting in that. Old things continue traveling through new worlds. The train reaches London late in the afternoon. Elias steps onto the platform. The station is enormous compared with Ashcombe. People everywhere. Voices, footsteps, carriages, steam, whistles, announcements. He stands for a moment, then begins walking. London is different from Ashcombe in almost every possible way. It is louder, darker, busier. The streets seem to move continuously. Elias has always found London slightly exhausting, but there is something beautiful about it too. The city is full of life, thousands of them. People passing each other without knowing anything about one another. A woman carrying flowers, a clerk reading a newspaper, a gentleman adjusting his hat, a child running beside a carriage, a policeman standing at a corner, a tired-looking man carrying a bundle of newspapers. Everyone going somewhere, everyone believing that wherever they are going matters. Perhaps it does. Elias reaches the address from his father's note shortly before sunset. The building is still there, but it has changed. The sign above the door belongs to a different business. A tailor. Elias looks at the address again. He checks the number. Correct. He enters. A young man looks up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about Henry Mercer." The young man thinks, "That name doesn't mean anything to me. He may have owned this building before my time." "How long have you been here?" 3 years. Elias sighs. Of course, 3 years is nothing compared with 37. He asks whether there are older records. The young man points toward the back. There might be some old papers upstairs. Elias thanks him. They search. Boxes, ledgers, receipts, old business documents. Most are useless. Then Elias finds a name. Merciabel. His father's name appears beside it. Elias sits down. The partnership was established in 1849. Clock repair and manufacture. He had never known his father had operated a business in London. The partnership lasted only 6 years. Then it ended. No explanation. Elias keeps reading. There are accounts, orders, names, payments. Then he finds an address. Another address. A shop near Clerkenwell. The business had apparently moved there. Elias writes it down. The young tailor watches him. "You might find something there, perhaps." The young man shrugs. "Or nothing." Elias smiles. That is usually how these things work. He leaves. Outside, evening has fallen. London is beginning to glow. Gas lamps illuminate the streets. Carriages pass through the wet roads. The rain has returned. Elias pulls his coat tighter. He walks toward the second address. The shop is gone. In its place stands a modern building. Of course, he stands across the street. For a moment, he feels foolish. He has traveled all this way for an address that no longer exists. Then he notices a small plaque, an old brass plaque, almost hidden beside the doorway. It bears a name, Mercer and Bell, Clockmakers, 1849, 1855. Elias steps closer. His heart does not race. There is no sudden revelation, only recognition. His father had stood here. His grandfather perhaps had too. This street had been part of their lives. Elias touched the plaque. The brass is cold. He stands there for several minutes. Then he notices a narrow doorway beside the building. A small shop, antique. The window contains old furniture, books, and clocks. Elias enters. A bell rings above the door. An elderly man sits behind the counter. He looks up. Evening. Good evening. Elias looks around. There are dozens of clocks. Of course, London seems determined to provide him with clocks wherever he goes. The elderly man notices his expression. You like clocks? I'm a clockmaker. Ah, the man looks at Elias more carefully. Belle? Elias pose. Yes, the old man smiles. I thought so. Elias is stares at him. Why? The man points toward a clock on the shelf, a small wooden travel clock. The case is dark. The brass fittings are worn. Elias recognizes it immediately. It is the clock from his father's notebook. His grandfather's clock. The lost clock. The one that was supposed to have disappeared decades ago. Elias steps closer. He does not touch it. He simply looks. The clock is silent. Its hands have stopped. The old man notices. You know it? Elias notes. My father mentioned it. The shopkeeper leans back. Samuel Bell. Yes. The old man is quiet for a moment. Then he says, Your father came here once. When? Long ago. How long? The old man thinks. More than 30 years. Elias waits. What did he want? The shopkeeper looks toward the clock. He came for this. Elias looks at the little wooden case. And did he take it? No. Why not? The old man smiles faintly. Because he said it wasn't time yet. Elias stands quietly. Outside, rain taps against the shop window. Inside, every clock is still, except one. A small clock near the counter ticks softly. Tick, tick, tick. The old shopkeeper reaches beneath the counter. He brings out a small envelope. Your father left this here. Elias looks at it. The name on the front is his, Elias Bell, his father's handwriting. Again, Elias does not open it immediately. He simply holds it. For the first time in many years, he feels something very close to anticipation. Not excitement, not fear, just the quiet feeling that a forgotten door has opened. And perhaps, after all these years, someone has finally remembered to tell him where it leads. The shopkeeper pours 2 cups of tea. Elias sits. The rain continues outside. The clocks remain still, and the little wooden clock from his grandfather waits patiently on the shelf, as though it has been waiting for him all along. The tea is served in 2 small porcelain cups. The shopkeeper places one in front of Elias. Then he sits back down behind the counter. For a while, neither man speaks. The rain continues against the window, soft, steady, almost soothing. It is the kind of rain that makes London look older than it really is. The gas lamps outside glow through the wet glass. Carriages pass slowly along the street. Their wheels make a quiet hiss against the pavement. Inside the shop, the air smells of old wood, dust, and tea. Elias looks down at the envelope. His father's handwriting is unmistakable. Samuel Bell had been dead for 37 years. And yet, here he was, still leaving notes, still creating small inconveniences for his son. Elias smiles. Did my father leave this recently? The shopkeeper laughs softly. No, I suppose not. He left it here many years ago. How many? The old man thinks 35, perhaps 36. Elias looks at the envelope. So, he knew I would come. Your father seemed to think you would. Why? The shopkeeper shrugs. Because he was your father. This is not an especially satisfying answer, but it is a very human one. Parents often believe they understand their children. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they are completely wrong. And occasionally, with enough time, they become right for reasons nobody can explain. Elias turns the envelope over. The seal is still intact. He has never been good at opening old letters. There is something uncomfortable about disturbing paper that has waited so patiently. Finally, he breaks the seal. Inside is a single sheet. The handwriting is slightly faded. He begins reading. His father explains that the wooden travel clock belonged to Elias's grandfather. It had been made in 1843. The clock had traveled with him during his early years as a young clockmaker. It had been carried through England. It had crossed the Channel. It had even traveled briefly into France. Then, during the 1850s, it disappeared. Samuel eventually found it again, but by then, his own life had changed. He had married. He had moved. He had opened his workshop, and the clock remained in London. The letter continues. Samuel explains that he had wanted to give the clock to Elias when Elias became a clockmaker himself, but he never did. Not because he had forgotten, because he thought the boy was too eager, too impatient, too interested in clocks as objects, not interested enough in what they represented. Elias stops reading. He looks toward the shopkeeper. My father thought I was impatient. The old man smiles. He was probably right. Elias laughs quietly. Unfortunately, he continues reading. Samuel writes that a clock is useful because it measures time. But a clockmaker must understand that time cannot be repaired. A damaged clock can be repaired. A broken gear can be replaced. A bent spring can be straightened. But an hour that has passed is simply gone. Elias reads the sentence twice. Then he lowers the letter. Outside, the rain continues. He thinks of Margaret. 6 years. It does not feel like 6 years. Some days feel longer. Some feel shorter. Grief has no reliable clock. Perhaps that is why people struggle with it. You cannot set it correctly. You cannot wind it. You cannot adjust the regulator. It simply moves. Samuel's letter continues. He tells Elias that the clock should remain in London until Elias is old enough to understand why his father kept it there. Elias looks toward the little wooden clock. Why? The shopkeeper lifts one shoulder. I never knew. You never asked? Your father wasn't the sort of man you asked too many questions. Elias smiles. Yes, he remembers. His father had always been quiet. Not cold, not unkind, just private, A man who could spend an entire afternoon repairing a clock without saying more than 10 words. Samuel Bell had believed that some things became clearer when left alone. Elias had hated that habit as a young man. Now, he finds himself doing exactly the same thing. The shopkeeper points toward the clock. There's something else. Elias looks up. What? Your father changed the mechanism. Changed it? Yes. Elias approaches the clock. He bends over it. The case is beautifully made. Simple, practical. No unnecessary decoration. He opens the back. The movement is old, but there is something unusual. A second set of gears has been added. Elias studies them. They are tiny, almost invisible. He takes out his magnifying glass. The shopkeeper watches. What does it do? I don't know yet. Elias moves one gear. Nothing happens. He checks another. Still nothing. Then he sees a small pin. He presses it. The back panel clicks. A hidden compartment opens. Elias studies. Inside is a small brass key. Nothing more. He lifts it. The key is delicate, very small, perhaps intended for a lock. He turns toward the shopkeeper. Where is the lock? The old man smiles. That is the interesting part. Elias waits. The shopkeeper points toward a tall cabinet at the back of the shop. It is covered with dust. Your father told me never to open it. Elias walks over. The cabinet is old, older than most things in the shop. There is a keyhole near the bottom. Elias holds the brass key beside it. The key fits. He does not turn it. Not yet. He looks back at the shopkeeper. You have had this cabinet for 30 years. Longer. And you never opened it? No. Why? Your father asked me not to. Elias notes. That sounds exactly like Samuel. A man who could leave a locked cabinet in a shop for 30 years and somehow expect everyone involved to remain curious but obedient. Elias places his hand on the key. He turns it. The lock clicks. The cabinet opens. Inside are books. Not treasures. Not gold. Not secret royal documents. Just books. Old books. Ledgers. Notebooks. A few bundles of letters. Elias almost laughs. After all the mystery, his father has apparently left him paperwork. Very appropriate. He removes the first ledger. The cover is faded. On the first page is a name, Samuel Bell. Then another, Thomas Bell. His grandfather. Elias sits on the floor. The shopkeeper brings another chair. The ledger contains records of clocks, dates, repairs, customers, sales. But between the technical notes are small personal comments. Elias reads them slowly. His grandfather had written about his first workshop, about his wife, about the birth of his son, about Samuel's childhood, about money, about illness, about ordinary life. Nothing extraordinary. And that is what makes it important. Elias realizes that his family had not been a collection of clockmakers. They had been a collection of people. People who had worried about rent. People who had argued. People who had fallen in love. People who had been tired. People who had made mistakes. The clocks were simply what they happened to build. He turns another page. There is an entry from 1855. His grandfather writes about closing the London shop. He mentions Samuel. He says that the boy wants to remain in London, but the family must return home. Then, beneath that, another line. Samuel believes the city is where his future lies. Elias smiles. His father had once wanted something different. He had forgotten that. Everyone knows Samuel as the quiet man who spent his life in Ashcombe. But once he had been young. Once he had wanted London. Once he had believed his future was somewhere else. Perhaps that is true of everyone. At some point, almost every person imagines another version of their life. The shopkeeper pours more tea. Elias continues reading. Another entry, then another. Eventually, he finds a familiar name. Margaret. His hands stop. The entry is dated shortly before their marriage. His grandfather had written that Samuel was worried. Not about Elias. About Margaret. He feared that Elias would spend his entire life working and forget to live. Elias looks up. The old shopkeeper says nothing. Elias laughs softly. My grandfather knew me too. He returns to the page. There is another sentence. A good clockmaker knows when to stop winding. Elias closes the ledger. He sits quietly. The rain outside begins to weaken. The shop has become darker. The gas lamps are brighter now. Evening has arrived. The old shopkeeper stands. I think that is enough for tonight. Elias nods. He looks toward the wooden clock. How much? The shopkeeper waves his hand. It was waiting for you. I can't take it without paying. Your father already paid. Elias looks surprised. When? 35 years ago. The shopkeeper smiles. He told me that one day his son would come. And if I didn't, then the clock would stay. Elias looks at the little clock. He understands. His father had not forced the future. He had simply left something behind. If Elias came, it would be there. If he did not, it would remain. No pressure, no demand, just patience. Elias carefully wraps the clock in cloth. He places it inside his leather case. The letter goes beside it. The shopkeeper walks him to the door. Before Elias leaves, the old man says, Your father was a good man. Elias pauses. Yes, he missed you. Elias looks down. I know. The old man nods. Then Elias steps outside. The rain has stopped. London is shining beneath the gas lamps. The streets are wet. The air is cool. Elias walks slowly toward his hotel. He carries the old clock close to his chest. For the first time in decades, he feels as though he has recovered something that was never truly lost. Not merely a clock, not merely a family object. A piece of time, a piece of his father, and perhaps, in some small way, a piece of himself. That night, in a small hotel room overlooking a quiet London street, Elias places the clock on the bedside table. He winds it. The mechanism begins to move. Tick, tick, tick. He lies down. The sound continues. Soft, regular, familiar. He closes his eyes, and somewhere between one thought and the next, Elias begins to understand what his father had been trying to tell him all those years ago. Time was never asking to be conquered. It was only asking to be noticed. And for tonight, that was enough. The little clock continues ticking beside the bed. Outside, London grows quieter. One carriage passes, then another. A distant bell rings, and gradually, the city settles into sleep.